In the summer of 1979, a man bearing only a pseudonym for a name wandered into the Elberton Granite Finishing Company in Elberton, Georgia. The man introduced himself to employee Joe Finley as Robert C. Christian. This pseudonym, R.C. Christian, would, over time, become the center of massive amounts of speculation, mystery, and sinister conspiracy. That fateful summer day, Mr. Christian told Mr. Finley that the Granite Company would be commissioned to excavate and finish a monument meant to stand as a message for future generations. It was to be the company's greatest undertaking in its history. When asked why he came to Elbert County, Mr. Christian only stated that the granite in the county was of the finest quality and that he came as the representative of a group of loyal Americans and believers in God. What would follow was a series of mysterious and downright abnormal experiences. This mysterious stranger would hire a private plane to survey the surrounding area for a place to erect this monument that no one asked for. He would walk into the Granite City Bank and speak with its president, Mr. Wyatt Martin, in order to finance the project. Despite wanting to keep his identity hidden, Mr. Christian was required to reveal his identity to Mr. Martin and Mr. Finley to prove he could afford this expensive and arduous undertaking. Mr. Christian made the decision to divulge his identity to the pair, but only once they solemnly vowed to never utter his or his group's identity, taking that information to their graves. And that is exactly what they did. To this day, the true identity of Mr. Christian remains unknown, but his actions during his short time in Elberton would ripple through the next several decades in a whirlwind of apocalyptic and esoteric speculations. The monument Mr. Christian commissioned would end up aptly named the Georgia Guidestones. Covered in 8 languages, including English, Latin, and Cuneiform, the Guidestones lay out guidelines for an ideal relationship between man and nature. Moreover, the 10 instructions do lay out some fairly sensible ideals, like protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts, or avoid petty laws and useless officials. On the surface, those things make sense. Justice is essential to a free society, and who likes nonsensical laws and bureaucrats? But those lines aren't what get the minds of those who've read the inscriptions pinging with apprehension. Guidelines like maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, balance personal rights with social duties, and unite humanity with a living new language certainly beg a lot of questions. Questions underpinned with potentially eugenic and genocidal implications. The residents around the Guidestones first met the monument with curiosity, but also repulsion. Furthermore, their presence imbued a sense of dark mysticism, with a local sandblaster stating that during his work on the monument, he felt an odd sense of apprehension and would occasionally hear disembodied voices and otherworldly music. Overall, despite their supposed intention of being an answer to future generations, the Guidestones have only engendered questions and, in some, fear. What did its cryptic guidelines mean? What are its ties to some of history's most secret societies? And why, in July of 2022, did someone or some people blow it up, leaving it to be officially demolished by a bulldozer the next day, with no arrests made in the subsequent domestic terrorism investigation? Tonight, we're going to dive in and discuss our opinion and some of the evidence and what it may mean. But remember, not everything that hides in the shadows is willing to be discovered. What's going on, Zach?
Nothing much. Just listening to what you were saying there about the Georgia Guidestones, and the whole time my mind's going like a million places a second, thinking of a whole different ideas and conspiracy theories and a whole bunch of just kind of weird stuff that kind of just correlate and relate.
Absolutely. And welcome everybody back to I Came With Fire podcast. As you heard, tonight's going to be on the Georgia Guidestones. I know that this one is a subject that a lot of people find interesting, and I've also found out just through some of the conversations I've had with people around me that not a lot of people know about them, but you can find a good amount of people who do. But you have to kind of be in that mindset, you know what I mean, to know
about for sure.
Them. Honestly, I think a lot of people first heard about the Georgia Guidestones when they did get blown up in July last year. And I know that, what is that? What's the Georgia Guidestones, And then I even remember when they got blown up, people were talking about that. You remember that shiny monolith that they found in the Utah desert during 2020? Yeah. And, but who were like, is that what that is? It's like, no, it isn't. You know what I mean? But no, man, it's honestly to me one of the most interesting things, especially when you start digging into some of its ties, like I said, to some secret societies, and not just newer secret societies that have been around for hundreds of years, and those societies having tenets is in them that date back all the way to ancient Egypt, ancient Babylon. So it's when you kind of think about just things that last through history and the sort of oral traditions and stuff like that that get passed down, it's kind of amazing that in today's society that some of those things that underpin the old world still exist today and are talked about and discussed and kind of guide other people's lives. You know what I mean? So, but I'm ready to have this conversation, man. This is an extremely interesting topic to me, and I'm ready.
Yeah, you said that like a lot of people didn't know about it till they got destroyed. I knew of them, and I knew of like the 10 things on them, but that's all I knew until they actually were destroyed. Once they were destroyed, I kind of looked more into them, and I was like, "This is really strange." So, when you kind of brought up like let's talk about the Georgia Guidestones, I was like, "Yes," and I had to like go and like refine some stuff and things that were kind of like in my mind in some like special corridor back in there. But no, it was fun re-looking up a bunch of stuff, and it just made me more interested in it the more I read about it. So
yeah, I knew what they were and kind of the implications that people have painted them with when it got blown up. And to me, I definitely my initial reaction was what a lot of people's initial reaction was like, oh shit, this means more than what the news is saying it means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the next day it got knocked over. And then, they had this mysterious car that drove by and, I don't know. So to me, there's just like classic signs of cover up and no one official cares like you think they should. And then also, of course they knock over something that's halfway blown up and weighs as much and is as large as this massive granite monument, so logical explanations.
With just one random bulldozer, and they tore it down like in the middle of the night. Like it wasn't like during the day or anything. They just kind of showed up, tore it down, and it was gone. I was like, what the heck?
I'm actually pretty sure they did knock it down during the day.
It was?
Yeah, they just didn't say anything to anybody.
Oh, maybe I'm just getting confused.
There wasn't like
with the videos because it blew up at night, right?
It blew up at night, yeah.
Okay, so I'm probably just confusing the videos.
Yeah, there wasn't like an official like, hey, due to what happened, we're going to knock these down. Right. It was just like a bulldozer rolled up to the monument and just started knocking them down. It knocked down like the center pillar at first, and then that kind of took down some of the rest of it. But yeah. And and I'll just say this right off the bat, that those Guidestones are in the middle of a large field. And it's like kind of one of those things where it's like, it's not like it's in the middle of a square or a courtyard where a bunch of people are walking around it all day, where it really could run the risk of falling onto somebody, and obviously it was a public space. The plot of land originally purchased by Mr. Christian was deeded eventually over to Elbert County and was a public space. And so could somebody have walked up on it, especially after it made the news, and it fallen on them? Absolutely. And is that the most logical reason why? Yeah, probably. Because you think, oh, wow, this mysterious and strange monument exists here. And then it makes the news that somebody blows it up. What's the first thing you're worried about somebody doing? Going up to it and looking at it, right? And so at that point, it's a crime scene. They labeled it an act of domestic terrorism, all this stuff. And so it does make sense to knock it over. But it is interesting that, they could have just roped it off, you know what I mean? And but then again, we're both cops. We understand, about how well crime scene tape works, especially for people who have their curiosity piqued to an above normal level.
Yeah, for sure. I just did a quick search. It looks like the Georgia Guidestones averaged about 20,000 annual visitors. So it didn't get like a ton of people. Yeah, it's not Disneyland. It's not a ground zero or anything like that. But it still gets that's 20,000 people every single year that come and kind of look at it still. Yeah. So it's still an interesting piece. And you're talking about the land. The land is actually underneath it. Actually, is also a granite boulder. It's like a huge granite like boulder, I think, and it's huge too. I think it's like, or or I don't know, they don't know for sure, but like they estimate it's like 3 miles like deep, and like a whole bunch of other like type of stuff. It's like this huge granite boulder that's like there that they also built it on. So it's a pretty big chunk of rock.
That's pretty incredible. Granite is one of the
Yeah.
hardest substances in the world. But one of the things too, because we're obviously going to get into it, is granite
Hmm.
has very big significance to Freemasons. And
It does.
so the fact that it's made of granite is not just a coincidence. It's not, hey, in Elbert County, Georgia, there just happens to be granite quarries, and it
Hmm.
was picked for a specific reason. That the
Yeah.
Yeah, and that whole thing about specificity and why something happened, and the very specific schematics with it, and which we'll talk about, are on purpose. And
Hmm.
coincidence in this case doesn't exist as much as one may think, right?
Hmm.
You're talking, and we're going to talk about some societies that do a lot of things on purpose that have a lot to do with um, with specifics, with very, very detailed minutia, and to maintain a secret society and run the world, right? You have to be very good at the small things. Um,
Yeah,
but
for
uh,
sure.
but anyway, yeah, man. I think to me one of the most interesting things with all of this is how the Georgia Guidestones has a lot of implications that secret societies in general, when you talk about them and the New World Order, um, they share a lot of similarities. And you look at
They
some
do.
of the things that are on there talking about, we look at climate change now, and then you talk about maintaining harmony with, the infinite and leave room for
Hmm.
nature, all these things that are on the Guidestones. And then you consider the fact that the Guidestones exist in the United States, and those
Yep.
Guidestones have some phrases on them that you can find in the writings of specific founding fathers who are said to be, a member of certain
Yeah.
secret organization that we'll get into. So,
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
yeah, man, I think that we should lead this off talking about Mr. Christian. What do you think?
I think that's great. We should get into RC Christian, which is a very
Yeah,
unique uh, initials and last name.
right. So that just kind of leads further into what we were talking about here. That not, when if you're going to go somewhere and you're going to give somebody a fake name, you literally have license to pick any name you want. You could have been Philip Baker, you could have been Thomas Jones, anything.
Could have
Zach
been
Smith.
Zach Smith. Yeah,
Thank you. Great minds think alike.
we do.
We do. You could have picked any name, but you didn't. And so when you have intention behind what you're doing, and everything that you're doing has to have some sort of meaning, of course, the name you're going to pick to give other people is going to be a name that has meaning, right? So RC
Yep.
Christian. So this, again, we'll say this is our opinion on evidence that you can find about this situation, about the people involved. It is, we understand, in large part conspiracy, but it is not meant to um, allude to the negative connotation that conspiracy can mean today, right? To a lot of
Hmm.
people, it's almost used as an accusation to erode somebody's credibility when you say the word conspiracy. Conspiracy means
Yeah.
itself to conspire together to make something happen, right?
Yep.
Um, so a lot of things in history are conspiracies and happened. The conspiracy to stab Caesar in the Roman Forum was a conspiracy, and it happened, right?
Hmm.
So that word has multiple meanings. It's just today, unfortunately, it's used as a derogatory term. So when we
Yeah.
speak on the conspiracy around this, we mean only that it has ties in ways that you can't prove without, in court, without all the information. We just don't have that. Does that make sense?
Correct.
So cool. So, Mr. Christian, it's very much speculated that the name RC Christian has ties to a group called the Rosicrucians,
Yep.
right?
And so
So,
the Rosicrucians um, is is like a spiritual cultural movement that apparently arose in Europe in the early 17th century. And the whole idea of Rosicrucian is to like represent like their symbol is like a rosy cross or a cross with a rose right in the middle, that type of stuff.
mhm.
Um, So that's kind of where it like mainly comes from. But they are very similar in nature to like Freemasonry and like our founding fathers and kind of what they were kind of thinking about and stuff. But they're still also like very secretive. It's one of the things I looked up was a video where these people were trying to find like Rosicrucians and stuff, and they found one. They found a girl who said she was a Rosicrucian,
Okay.
but that when I watched it, I was very interested by it because Rosicrucians are very secretive. So like Freemasons, like they obviously exist. People can be like, yeah, I'm a Freemason and stuff. Like Rosicrucians are like Freemasons in the sense of how they operate, but they're way more secretive of telling people who they are and that they're a part of this group. So I thought it was very strange that this like woman was telling them that she was a Rosicrucian. So I don't know how accurate she was, but she was very knowledgeable in that like group and stuff. What do you know
Yeah.
about Rosicrucian stuff? What do you have to add to that?
Right. So Rosicrucians, they do have a lot in common with Freemasons in
Mm-hmm.
specific ways, but largely. So I googled Rosicrucians, and in California there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of temples, and there are a lot of temples like Rosicrucian temples across the United States, in
Yeah.
Canada, all over the world, right? And in California, there's actually a Rosicrucian Egyptian museum, right? And it's funny that that exists, but it makes sense when you consider a lot of the archaic knowledge and hidden knowledge that the Rosicrucians and other secret societies claim to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that, and again, our founding fathers, specifically Thomas Paine, wrote about in his book Age of Reason about Egyptian priests, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so when you go on their website, there's literally a splash page and it says, "Congratulations on your decision to become a member of the Order of Rosicrucians." Okay. And so I
So
clicked,
they
like,
just so they just freely assume that if you go to their page, you just want to be one.
so it's one of those things, right? Where if you want to know, if you want to become a Freemason, all you have to do is ask. All you have to do is show up, right?
Yeah.
And I've asked this question before, just out of curiosity, because I'm not a Mason, I'm not a Rosicrucian, I'm not whatever, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
have a healthy curiosity about these things, right? And I'll just say out loud, like my grandfather is a Freemason, and he
Mm.
attained a certain degree. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you go on the website for the Rosicrucians. They congratulate you on your decision on being in the website, and then it asks you what language you speak and then what country you're in, right? And it automatically chooses English and the United States, right? And so I clicked like continue or whatever, and then it takes you to a page and it immediately asks you for $150. Okay, and it's an annual fee, and you can choose to pay all $150 up front. It tells you that you will be charged $150 today, or you
Yeah.
can select the monthly fee thing, and then you pay monthly, right? So
So
obviously that
it gives you no
immediately asks you
information.
for money.
Yeah.
That's not
So
true. It does give you
Okay.
so there are other links on the page where you can go and it'll tell you a ton of texts that you can read about,
Okay.
okay, Rosicrucianism. And Rosicrucianism has a ton of undertones of mysticism, alchemical undertones. They talk a lot about hidden knowledge. It openly advertises that there are members of the Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faiths, and
Mm-hmm.
but the essential theme of Rosicrucianism, again, I keep using these terms, is hidden knowledge and mysticism. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that there is this belief that you are nature and the universe are these things that can be understood in a physical way and like through physical science, but magic at the same time, right? That using that term magic like in like the alchemical sense, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
it gives you all of these sources you can go read. And one of the things with Rosicrucianism is that it's tied back to a person who there's speculation on whether or not he was actually real or it was somebody who maybe was a pseudonym or made up. But Christian
Yeah.
Rosenkreuz, if you say it in German, it's like Rosenkreuz. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that this person produced all of these mysterious texts and they'd had like talked about alchemy and the divine overall being understood in that sense, right?
Hmm.
Which it's so I looked again. There's a ton of stuff, but immediately up front, it asks you for money before you can get into anything else. And to me, I
Yeah,
see it as kind of like one of these filters where it's like, how serious are you about your interest in this? You know what I mean?
yeah. Are you
Because
just are you just a person showing up to
are
just
you
look?
just are you just
Yeah,
me who's being nosy, right, and trying to
yeah.
find out all this stuff? Okay,
Trying to get info for a podcast.
right, and if it is a filter, it worked because I'm not paying money to, not
Yeah,
yet anyway, right, to dive
yeah.
into something like that and figure out what goes on. But again, I
Well,
have
just
talked to people. Go ahead.
I was gonna say to say on that too is like $150, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much money,
That's
but
not.
to a lot of people, it is.
Yeah.
Like, and so it's like in a way, it makes it so they if $150 isn't a lot to you, then that means you make a lot of money. So if you could easily just throw $150 to be a part of this, then it keeps their organization relatively wealthy. And if most people who are relatively wealthy are probably also higher educated and a bunch of other stuff, so in a way, it kind of keeps it's bad to say this, but they're in a way trying to keep like I guess like the lower income people out or the lower educated people out. They just want very specific type of person.
Yeah. So I could
I guess
see
when it
that.
comes to economic class or whatever.
Hmm. I could see that, and I could also see it as if you're charging people money to be a part of something, it's kind of
Yeah.
like somebody charging a lot of money to purchase a dog, right? You want to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that the person who's buying your animal or joining your organization has not just a rudimentary curiosity like me to figure out some basic baseline information, but that you're
Mm-hmm.
serious. So that when you enter that space with them, they don't. There's like knocking off on your list of worries about somebody's seriousness about being present in that space, right? If you paid the money to be there, you're more than likely serious, and then therefore there's like almost like an element of trust that you're coming in with, an initial trust builder. You know what I mean? I see it
Yeah.
that way too. And
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
obviously, if you're you know if you're some boot airman, and you're 18 years old, you're probably not throwing $150 at, a website that says a word you probably can't pronounce, right?
Yeah.
And just doing it just because.
No,
So
you
yeah,
need that 150 for your shop at tornadoes and your bangs.
yeah, or the Jordans you probably can't afford. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Your
but
vape juice.
exactly. So, but the name R.C. Christian, a lot of people speculate, is a reference to the Rose Cross R.C., right? Or the
Mm-hmm.
Rosicrucian. And then obviously the word Christian in the name. And Mr. Christian identified himself as a Christian and as the leader of loyal Americans who believed in God, right? So up front, I do agree. I mean, there's a lot of logical sense in why that name was chosen and given
Mm-hmm.
for somebody who is essentially the patron of a monument like that.
Yeah.
But then you look, if you want to expand on some of the tenets of Rosicrucianism and some of the things that actually are on the monument, before we get into some of the evidence you can find about really who Mr. Christian is, and then some of the beliefs he has, and then some of the ties to some of the other organizations.
Well, I've got a question. Well, before we kind of get to that, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Do you think Mr. Christian was actually a person high up in the Rosicrucian thing, or do you think he is just uh, a symbol or a scapegoat for it? Because when he approached like the people to make the stones and stuff, he said that he was a representative
Mm-hmm.
of this group. He was a representative of wealthy investors who wanted this up for like religious purposes and a bunch of other stuff. So like, do you think he actually was high up, or was he just some bottom person who was just really passionate about the cause and was just chosen to do it just in case he was captured or found out or something crazy happened?
So I'll say this: I could see him being a like mid-tier, near higher echelon level of leadership, I guess. Right, and this is
Mm-hmm.
pure speculation because when you go around, there's Freemason temples, there's Rosicrucian temples all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all of these organizations have central leadership, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I guess he could be, and I'll just say before we talk more about it that it's believed that Mr. Christian was a physician from Iowa. That potentially
Yes.
he was the leader, I guess you could say, of that group that was located in Iowa, and not necessarily like overall Rosicrucian leadership, if he was indeed a
Mm-hmm.
Rosicrucian, right? Um,
Yeah.
but that's where that sense of representation and leadership comes from, because again, right, what we learn about leadership is that, you're the one taking action and doing things, and if you're going to commission something to the level of the Georgia Guidestones, you're not going to send Bubba out to Georgia to fly out there, spend the time to stay out there, go through all the paper. That to me, now talking out this question,
Yeah.
if you're going to a bank, right, and you have to potentially, you make the decision, right, to reveal your true identity under sworn secrecy to the other people, okay, then you're probably leadership. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
if you send someone else, the human quality there is there's going to be a sense of doubt about, um, I guess, what really happened, or if that's going to happen. So, or that the identity of your group is going to remain anonymous to other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, to me, I feel like some sort of like local Rosicrucian leadership, probably, or if, like I said, he was actually Rosicrucian.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. And the reason why I asked is because when I was looking this up, there was like people who were like saying that, oh, he probably wasn't that high up, or he's like a bottom feeder or whatever. But no, I agree with what you just said. You're not going to send a mid-tier, bottom person of your organization to represent the organization for this. And the amount of secrecy it entailed was because he was probably high up. If it was a bottom feeder, then it wouldn't matter who he was. He could have went and did it, and he found out. No one would care, to be honest.
That's true. Just give a level of plausible deniability. You don't know this
Yeah,
person or whatever. But
yeah,
then consider too, like, I mean, you've led troops just like I have. When you need something important done, you don't just go find anybody. You go to the people you
yeah,
trust. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So when you say that, I don't, maybe perhaps, Mr. Christian and this local group weren't the ones with the idea for the monuments. He could have just been the person chosen to go and make that happen, or he could have come
Get
up with
it
the
done.
idea. Yeah, just the guy to get it done, or it could
Mm-hmm.
have been an idea that he generated on his own. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But again, it takes a certain amount of skill to figure out where you want to do this, and to specifically pick the random location of Elbert County, Georgia, and then based on the granite. And think about the time, right? It's 1979. The internet didn't
Mm-hmm.
exist. There isn't just the ease of access to information at your fingertips. You would have
Mm-hmm.
had to have had a network of people and done legitimate research to figure out that existed, those granite quarries existed in that specific spot. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So again,
Yep.
that takes a dynamic level of information harvesting to be able to figure that out and make the decision. So again, we're tying that back into, is he some sort of leadership? Yeah, probably. It doesn't make sense to me
Yep.
that
Yep.
he's some sort of low level, guy.
Yeah, and it's the is his name too, just kind of like assigns him to be something of importance because it's R.C. Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the first manifestos written by the Rosicrucians in 1614. There's a sentence that states the word RC should be their seal, mark, and character. So, like anything RC is supposed to be like, this was us. We did it. Like, we were a
Calling
part of
card.
this. Yep. Like, hey, that was us. We're not gonna say it was us, but it was us. Like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what it goes back to. Yeah,
We're
for
the
sure.
wet bandits.
The web
Mm-hmm.
But going back to the before I took you off your question because I thought my question was more important. Could you go into it again? Could you repeat it for me so it's fresh in my mind and fresh in the listeners?
No, so the idea behind the Georgia Guidestones is a shared ideal in a lot of other conspiracies, right? And
Yes.
that thought process about population control or climate change, living in harmony with nature, so to speak, they
Yes.
all, as I said in the cold open, have a lot to do or can be seen through the lens of either eugenics, right? Talking about guiding reproduction wisely. And
Mm-hmm.
we're going to go line by line on
Yep.
these guidelines and talk about them. But
Yep.
the eugenic ideal, or the eugenic lens and genocidal lens, right? So let's just talk, real quick before we get into the weeds, like we will, about that, right? So if you're not familiar with the term eugenics, right? I feel like everybody's probably very familiar with the term genocide. There's some very
Yeah.
right. So there's some very I don't want to say
Whenever I think
popular
of
isn't the right word, but
Yeah. Whenever I think of eugenics, first thing that comes to my mind of like most recent history is going to be Nazi Germany,
mhm,
obviously. They
for
had
sure.
this idea that, oh, there's a perfect race and we're going to build it and we're going to breed certain people to make their kids stronger, and that they were literally trying to make their population, their country, their people like the strongest, smartest, fastest. And then they went to the Olympics and like lost most things. But uh, it's that concept though. It's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's an intentional act of trying to improve, and the belief in that you can create a perfect human that can engender a perfect population of human beings, right? And
Yep.
there's a lot of very nefarious undertones with that. Obviously, some very dark things have happened in the name of
Yes.
eugenics, right? But when you're talking about, as in the Guidestones, guiding reproduction wisely, right? And then it highlights, the need for diversity. And then let me pull it up here because I don't want to misquote.
Yeah.
Um,
While you're pulling that up,
mhm.
I just want to talk real quick because you said like guiding genetics to whatever and do it wisely, but it's like, what is that based off of? Is it who decides what is wise for that? Who decides how it should be done? Who did like because humans were naturally flawed. If anything has humans in it, then it's flawed, right?
Mhm.
So it's gonna um, it's a lot of power for one entity or one group or one person to decide who gets born, who doesn't. Like that's a scary thought.
And that's always the question when you talk about any large government overreach in the first place, right? Not to get too
Yeah.
far off onto a tangent, but that ethereal them, right? They. Who are they?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they get to make these decisions? And again, we've said on other podcasts that human beings are fallible creatures. We make
Yep.
mistakes. We don't make the right decision. And very often we make decisions from an emotional place and through a selfish lens, whether you even realize that or not, right? And
Yep.
so putting the maintenance of humanity in the hands of a small select group of human beings is not a good idea. But
Correct.
I found the actual language is guide
Mm-hmm.
reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. So when you talk about eugenics, what do you want? You want somebody who's the perfect person, right? So when I think of genetic diversity, it doesn't necessarily just mean like racial diversity. Obviously, if you have a genetic pool that is very small, right, you're not going to have human beings that are as functional as people that have a larger gene pool, right? Look at what happened
True.
with a lot of royalty throughout history. You know what I mean? All of the
Got
inbreeding that
deformities.
happened.
Yeah.
Exactly. Deformities. You have intellectual. What's the word I'm looking for?
Disparities.
Yeah, intellectual disparities, all these things that cause problems from having a gene pool that's too small. So I think
Yeah.
when I look at this, I don't necessarily think of like diversity in the sense that you may think of today when you use the word diversity. And there's some evidence to
Yeah.
back that up. and some later things that we'll kind of bring up when we talk about some of the evidence that points to who Mr. Christian actually is. And I'll reference this again later when we have that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
But talking about improving fitness and diversity to me means, again, that eugenic lens. It's very easy to look at it from that angle, that eugenic lens. And then when you talk about maintaining humanity under 500 million, well, then you consider that the population of the United States is like 350 plus, right? Or thereabouts right now. And consider that just 150 million more people would be the global population is pretty wild. And getting there, because it doesn't say reduce humanity to this number, it says maintain humanity, right? Which could also be, again, when you talk about making specific choices with what you're doing and how you say it, if you put something up that says reduce humanity to this number, it's automatically going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just going to kill them all?
Right. If you put maintain, okay, then that sounds less invasive, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure what the global population was in 1979. We would have to look that up, but I am fairly certain that it was above 500 million people, to where you could, maybe if, you could say like, well, we're coming up on 500 million people, so we're going to put this monument up and be like, hey, let's just keep it here. That's not, you know what I mean? So again, saying it's that soft language you use when you're talking to somebody, when you're trying to like soften the blow of something they're not going to take very well. People tend to say things in a manner that is more easily understood and more easily felt, taking that other person's emotions and thought processes into account. Maintain sounds better than reduce, in my opinion. That's kind of how I look at that. That's Brandon Gresham's, view on that statement.
Yeah. I just jamied the 1979 world population.
Put that shit up.
And it was 4.3 billion was 1979.
See? So not even close.
No. Way more than 500 million.
And I didn't think it was close, but still,
I'm just curious. I want to know when the world population was 500 million.
That's an interesting question. I don't know. Genuinely.
Yeah, because I want to know. Let's see here.
So going back to why you looked that up, one of your questions about, do I think Mr. Christian was some sort of leadership? One of the things that he expressed to Joe Finley was that the idea of these Guidestones was the work and efforts of 2 decades worth of work. Go ahead.
The world population was estimated, because they don't know for sure, obviously, to be 500 million in 1650, which is the same century when the Rosicrucians were founded and wrote their first manifesto. I didn't know that, and we just tied that together.
How interesting is that?
That's very strange.
That is very strange. Ah, man. Let's obviously we don't know if that is actually true, but let's talk about that for a second. If again, how would, in our mind, looking back at history, how would somebody know that that's the population of the planet? You know what I mean? Because and the history we all hear about, okay, 1650 was only like 150 plus years removed from Columbus's journey to the New World, right? Even though we all know that Columbus was not the first person to discover, the other side of the world. Leif Erikson was somebody who way before Columbus did, and there's even evidence that the Chinese landed on what's now like the west coast of the United States prior to that, right?
Yeah.
So, but to Europeans, right, that idea of the New World is not, super old. It's 150-ish years old. So, I don't know, could you speculate back then? I don't know. But it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. So what it says here is that they think it was 500 million, and they say that's based off of just obviously Western Asia, Europe, and like Africa and stuff like that, and like the Mediterranean area. They obviously don't know North and South. Ooh, what was that, Gresham? What was that there?
We'll talk about it later.
Oh, okay. A little teaser. But yeah, Well, they obviously don't know like the North and South America, all type of stuff, which there was probably
Right.
millions of people in those areas as well. But
Well, yeah, you think 100 years prior to that, you had the conquistadors running through South and Central America, just
yeah,
obliterating those Mesoamerican cultures,
yeah,
destroying them, killing people off.
yeah,
But I mean, let's think about it. Like at that point, you did have people, explorers going into Asia, going into the new world, right, and reporting back. So I mean, maybe what I mean. Potentially, you could think like you send estimates of how many people you've run into, no matter where you go. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
that information, information traveled slower back then for sure. But 100, talking about the span of decades, like it's very plausible, I guess, to at least see right through this conversation how that could happen. Some sort of
Hmm.
census. You know what I mean? There were world maps. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
interesting thought. That's actually that's kind of wild. 1650.
Yeah, it just lines up with everything
It
because
does.
it was what did I say? It was 1649 when the Rosicrucians wrote the.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's a little bit of synchronicity.
that's so strange.
That is.
That just makes me. It was 1614 is when they wrote the manifesto. Sorry, not
Okay.
1649, but still within 30ish,
Not that
40ish
far off.
years. No,
Yeah.
and if it's
Interesting.
an estimate 500 million, it could have been 500 million in 1614 as well.
Yeah.
That's that blew my mind. I didn't even know my mind was gonna be blown more than it already was.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
So yeah, um, the idea of population control, talking about being in harmony with Earth, those things are
Mm-hmm.
on there, right? So
Yep.
when you consider the Georgia Guidestones and you consider some of the other conspiracies that people talk about, and some of the, I guess, sort of evidence that's out there in other areas, you get into some other organizations, right? And then some other, I guess you could, buildings, facilities, and stuff like that around the globe, right? Um, so a while back, and again, not to use the term conspiracy in a derogatory way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But um, the conspiracy was levied, by people like Alex Jones, and take with a grain of salt with Alex Jones. Although he at some point, sometimes he says things that have been right, but sometimes he says stuff that has been very not okay, right? So
Even
to me, I'm like,
a blind bird will catch a worm every once in a while,
sure, you pick,
or
yeah,
a blind
exactly.
drone.
Sure, a blind drone. If it spies, it flies, or flies, it spies, right?
Yeah.
But so anyway, um, he infiltrated the Bohemian Grove, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, he had a news channel, I guess you could say, where he talked about what he found. And there's a YouTube video which I remember, right? The first time I saw this video of him sneaking into the whole Bohemian Grove thing, uh, I was shown on Post, right? Which is, of course, the place you have all these really kooky conversations. Someone's like,
Yep.
dude, have you ever heard of cremation of care? And I'm like, what is cremation of care? You know what I mean? Because like I know what the word cremation means. It's
Yeah.
just like you're like my grandma was cremated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you're cremating care, it's like, what does that mean? And so I'm shown this video, okay, and it's very grainy. There's this spooky music going on. There's this really large statue, and I'm like, what the fuck is all this? Looking at it, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's like, this guy talking, and he's being really loud and animated, and then you can just see all this mist coming across the body of water and a boat and people getting off, and then like what looks like them sacrificing somebody, and then it's just like, what the hell? This is on YouTube, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it's supposedly filmed in secret with all these people watching it, and you're just like, what the hell, And so I remember thinking, like, dude, if that's real, that's terrifying, And that was like kind of like my introduction into secret societies and their nefarious plans for the rest of us. Okay, their festivus for the rest of us. And
Yeah.
but regardless, that kind of takes you down the road of some other things, right? So some of the other ideals that organizations like Bohemian Grove, which 100% is a real group, okay,
Yes.
they
So
meet legitimately
for
in the.
people who don't,
Yeah, yeah, go
yeah.
ahead,
So for
go ahead.
people who don't know, the Bohemian Grove was founded apparently in 1878. It's a 2,700 acre like compound, huge place in
Not far
Monte
from
Rio,
me.
California. Yeah, in Monte Rio, California. And they have it's a all male membership that includes artists, musicians, as well as many prominent business leaders, government officials, and former U.S. presidents, senior media executives, and just a ton of people of power. But again, they're all men. It's this huge area, and they go there for a while, and it happens annually, I think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what they
happens
say anyway,
annually.
right?
Yeah,
And
happens annually, and they go there for I think like a week or so or a couple days, and it's just like a huge get together. And who knows what they're talking about? Who knows what they're planning? What they're coordinating? Um, it'd be a great place to maybe do some new world order stuff. Kind of get
yeah,
those ducks in a row.
and that's the implication, right? And that's kind of the
Yeah,
whole. Those are the ties we're trying to make here to the Guidestones. These ideas of population control and making decisions for other people, having again, one of the things in the Georgia Guidestones, it says, right here, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court, right? So
mm-hmm.
there is no such thing as a world court right now. Like there are organizations that represent large portions of the world, right? The
Yeah,
UN,
yeah,
right? NATO, the World Economic Forum supposedly speaks for the world, even though we all know how terrifying that group is, right? So, but
yes, very scary.
there is no world court, right? You cannot say like what's going on now, right? Let's just use this as an example. You can't
Yeah,
say like all these countries are petitioning Russia and Ukraine to take it before the world court and sort their issues out before going to blows, right? There is nothing like that. So when you
mm-hmm.
talk about these groups like Bohemian Grove or the Bilderberg group, right? And then other older groups of people making decisions on behalf of other people that are that tie into a grander scheme, right? Um, that's what all of this is about. When you meet there in Bohemian Grove, this whole cremation of care thing, okay, is about throwing off the cares of the world. And if you listen in the video, one of the things this person orating very animatedly, he says is begone dull care, okay? And I looked that phrase up, and essentially all it's actually has ties to a very very old movie, that sentence, okay? But begone
Yeah,
dull care basically just means to cast off your worries, okay? And this isn't like, don't worry, be happy, okay? Just go about having a good day. It's not Hakuna Matata. This is, begone dull care, cremation of care is throwing off the weight and yoke of humanity, and that you have to make decisions that may have human collateral, okay? And that when you're making decisions about, who's going to get to eat or whatever, right?
yeah.
These are the sorts of cares that you're quote unquote cremating when you're attending these things so you can make decisions almost from a guilt free standpoint. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's where you're like, oh, it's perfectly okay for me to eliminate these people because it's saving humanity in the at the end game. The lives
Right.
of many outweigh the lives of a few, or vice versa. The lives of a few outweigh the lives of the many, whatever their kind of idea is here.
Yeah, it's like it's almost a utilitarian idea in that what's best for the majority may leave a minority of people who are just going to get the shit end of the stick essentially, and
Yeah,
and that being a leader like in the military, you make decisions that are going to leave people unhappy, right? And that leaves you with at least some people, I should say, with like a sense of like guilt or like you failed in some aspect. You know what I mean? Obviously, we're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about something as small as making a day-to-day, or something that can be as small as making a day-to-day decision as a leader in any position. We're
Yeah.
talking about, because in the military, you can't make decisions that cost people their lives, right? But throwing off, those cares of the world when you're making decisions to preserve humanity or really just preserve your own interests as the elite of the world, which is more than likely
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of the elites of the world, um, do you think we should probably kind of get into kind of what these guidestones were saying, like these commandment type things? We can go line by line, kind of figure out what each host's thoughts on are about, and kind of what we think they mean by
Hmm.
how they're written and stuff.
Yeah, let's do that. And we can circle back a little bit onto some of the other evidence out there that exists today that isn't conspiracy. When it comes to these groups of people making decisions for us, and then just kind of some of the ties they have to some of these older organizations like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. But
Yeah, for sure.
You want to start us off here?
Yeah, so we're gonna start at the bottom and move our way up to the top because the top one is the one that I think is the most controversial, which we've kind of discussed a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of these, like you said in the beginning, they're not as they sound great. Like obviously that's something we should do. So we're gonna go line by line here. So we'll start at number 10, and it says, "Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature." So it says that last line twice.
Nice.
What are your thoughts on that one? Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Times two.
Hmm. So I look at it, pretty plainly, I suppose, that when
Yeah.
you look at human beings in general, we are very destructive creatures, okay? We
Mm-hmm.
don't, for the most part, live in harmony with nature. There are lesser examples or less examples of human beings making an actual effort to live in harmony with nature than there are examples of human beings just using the world as a tool for its own advancement, right?
For sure.
So when you think about that, you consider, just the things human beings do. We overfish, we overfarm, we deforest, all these things. We have, to create energy, we've had these massive disasters, these nuclear reactor meltdowns, Fukushima,
Mm-hmm.
right? We had that massive oil spill that happened in the Gulf. Well, there's been multiple, but like the one I'm thinking of is the one that happened in
The BP
2010. Yeah, the one that happened in
BP oil spill.
2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. These things that you could say they're a cancer on the earth, right? Because we're doing things that damage the only planet we have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you are just driving that point home with leave room for nature, leave room for nature. But let's consider the language again here, right? Being very specific with the words we use, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We are carving words into one of the hardest substances known to man, okay? So you're not doing this arbitrarily. You're doing
Nope.
this
It's
with a
not
lot of
willy
intention.
nilly.
So when you
Yep.
say, be not a cancer on the earth, right? We don't need to explain just obviously how devastating something like cancer is, right? So when you are alluding to human beings being cancer and or not, saying don't be a cancer on earth, you're already implying that there's decisions that are being made that are cancerous to, the survival of the earth or our survival on this planet, right?
Yep.
So already casting dark overtones onto people in general and looking at people in a negative way, right? Is that
Correct.
sort of like self-loathing that exists in a lot of these groups, okay? And again, seeing this is the thing with a lot of these groups. Again, like when you talk about the them or they, right? Is they see themselves as these people that aren't a part of everyone else, and that's kind of what we're getting at here. Is these groups exist, right, to make decisions outside of what lesser men, the interests of lesser men. And that's what, again, like the Bohemian Grove is all about. This,
Yep.
you and me aren't welcome, right? We're not Henry
Correct.
Kissinger. We are not, a president. We're not Jeff Bezos. These are people that have been to Bohemian Grove, right? We're just you and me, two people, middle class, average Joes, right? We're not
Mm-hmm.
welcome, okay? And that's on purpose. You're being exclusive because you see yourself as the answer and not the cancer, and not trying to rhyme, but it did, right? So
You're a poet and you don't even know it.
it happened that way. But you see it. So to me, I take this as be not a cancer, leave room for nature, leave room for nature as nature is good, humans are bad, so to speak. Does that make sense? That's why there needs to be
Yeah.
less of us. What do you
Yeah,
see?
you took all the words out of my mouth, Gresham.
Dang it.
Get out of my head. But no, I did want to touch on kind of what you started with, where you're talking about how humanity destroys the earth to be able to live in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like every other animal that I can think of, and obviously there's probably going to be some animals that destroy things, but almost all of them live in harmony in some sense with the earth. We're the only creature that like changes entire ecosystems to make it better for us. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is crazy to me. And I think this might tie in, like, be not a cancer on the earth, right? So
Mm-hmm.
technically every human being has cancer. Cancer is just an overabundance of like your cells growing, and then
Right.
they because they're populating so fast they get damaged, and then it just becomes an issue. But if you're relatively healthy, your body can fix that. It goes, wait, stop doing that. It kills off the cell that's overpopulating, so it stops doing it, and it continues on. So it's okay for your body to have cancerous cells. It's just your body needs to have not a lot of them so it can contain it and keep you healthy. So this kind of will tie into maintain 500 million. So if it's saying us as humanity or cancer, 500 million might be the amount that this organization is saying that it's enough so it doesn't become an abundance and cause cancer. It's enough to where nature can contain it
Mm-hmm.
and keep everything in harmony.
Right.
Yeah.
All right,
You want to
man.
hit us with the ninth? You want to hit us with the ninth one, Gresham?
Yeah, man. So it says here, to me, this is again tying into the last one, but again, uh, in a way, there's an element of truth to it, right? So prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite, right? So off the bat, to me, we have this Rosicrucian element of the infinite, right? There's the infinite to me um, invokes thoughts of that like mystical element and trait that exists in some of those Rosicrucian Freemason thought processes, right? That
Mm-hmm.
we all belong to a larger infinite, and then prizing truth, beauty, love, all these things to remain in harmony, right? Um, to me, this just again like speaking plainly on what I think this could mean and what the overarching theme here that they're getting at is, you know, what somebody finds to be truth or beauty or love is subjective, okay? Like
Correct.
ultimately, right, like something like love should be objective, right? Because it should have one meaning, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And but obviously it doesn't because we love different people and different people are different, right? So
There's also
all
different
this
forms of love.
different forms
Like
of
there's like the
love.
Greek, like I think it's like with the 5 different Greek versions of
Right.
love and stuff like
Yep.
that.
Yeah. But yeah, so seeking harmony with the infinite. To me, this is just like one of these like esoteric thought processes on like uh, finding the good in things and staying true to what's good, and that the overarching infinite or nature, right, is that good. Because if you as a human being are fundamentally funneling your energy into truth, beauty, and love, then you're more in line with what nature is, which to me just harkens back to, if I have to tell you to do good, then inherently you may be bad, I guess. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying?
No, I see that too. My my thing with it though is a prize, truth, beauty, love. Right.
Mm-hmm.
If this is like a new world order where like you would have like overlords like looking over you, you said how like obviously beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Truth is also in kind of like what you kind of believe in and kind of how you grew up, stuff like that. Things that happen in your life. Um, there is actual truth. Like 2 + 2 will always be 4. It's not going to not be 4. But
Right.
like there's certain things that can still be subjective. But if you have your overlords, I think this is kind of in a way. It's kind of in a way like if you look at like North Korea, right? They have their like supreme leader, and he designates, or their government designates what haircut you can get and like what type of clothes you can wear, because that's their beauty and their truth. I'm
Sure.
wondering if that might be kind of what they're getting at here too, to where they're like, well, when we control it all, there will be this beauty and there will be this truth, and that's what you will prize. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, there is some empirical evidence of groups that have say out loud, or at least say outwardly, that they have the interests of people in mind, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
not to jump ahead to our next guest, but in his book, okay, he talks about how as a kid, he was thrown into school with, and I'm going to kind of speak generically, right? And they had
Yeah.
uniforms, right? They had the
Yep.
white T-shirt with the neckerchief they had to wear, and the neckerchief color was basically what your rank was in the structure there at the school, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have, again, you're giving somebody an identity when you do stuff like that, okay? Which is the whole reason behind wearing uniforms, whether it's in the military or in school, right? My
Mm-hmm.
daughter wears a uniform at school. It's to kind of remove some of the identity to make, to the idea behind it is to limit bullying, right? But like, so
Yep.
again, that decision was made for the benefit of everybody else, right? So there is evidence of people doing that as a form of control that's for the greater good. Greater good, I say in
Yeah.
quotations.
That actually leads into the eighth one:
Mm-hmm.
balance personal rights and social duties.
Yep.
So you were just talking about how like you would use uniformity and you would use like the stripping of individuality to kind of control and stuff. That would be the social duties, like the
Yeah.
group, the togetherness. This is to balance it. So there needs to be a balance of you being an individual, but still wearing your uniform, being part of the group. You know what I
Well, see,
mean?
here's the thing, man. Like again, like not to like jump back into what we were just saying with Rick's book, right? But the whole concept of where you're part of a community, so you as an individual have no ownership, right? So
Yep.
balancing, that's your social duty, is that your business or your personal items are no longer yours. It's a social duty that you give up that ownership in this specific example, right? You're giving up
Mm-hmm.
your ownership because it belongs to the collective, okay?
Yeah.
And these
It's for
are
the greater good.
right, and these are concepts, again, like what we're talking about. The ideology we're talking about in the book is communism, right? Castro,
Marxism.
Marxism, communism, right? But balancing personal rights with social duties, obviously, you know, and we've discussed this before, but as an American or as a human being, you do have social expectations, right, to do and make decisions that are the best for other people, right? You're not just going to, again, you know, let's use an example. You're not going to blow through a four-way stop sign because you want to. Okay, it is the
Yes.
law that says you must stop at a stop sign, but this is like the difference between malum prohibitum and malum in se, right? What is inherently wrong and what is wrong based on the law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's wrong to blow through a four-way stop sign because you may kill somebody or hurt somebody, but it is also against the law, right? But it's your social responsibility not to harm other people, right? So the pursuit of happiness, as long as your rights and what you're doing don't infringe on my rights and what I'm doing, right? So those are social
Yep.
responsibilities. There's a social contract we all engage in every single day. But to me, this is not talking about generic social duties. This is talking about, hey, it's like, you may have to give up some of your personal freedom to be able to participate in society. And when you don't want to do that and you're not balancing your personal, it says here too, personal rights, Rights are
Yeah,
inherent. No one gives you your rights. You are born with your rights. There is not a piece of
correct.
paper. There is not a person that says these are your rights. Your rights exist because you exist. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you say, it's basically like saying you have to be okay, again, with this whole giving up a little personal liberty for a little security. You know what I mean? No. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, that's what that says. Balance your personal rights with social duties, meaning you have to give up some of your personal rights for the better of other people. And that right
Yeah.
there is 100% control and not okay. That's how I see that.
I Yep. I agree. I think you're like the master of like segueing without even knowing you're segueing. But you brought up laws and you brought up like stop signs. Number 7, avoid petty laws and useless officials. So this one for me, again, the idea of this whole thing is that there would be like a group in charge. So like, what are petty laws to the group or something like that? Um, I'm hoping that they're like getting into stuff like, so in Washington State, there is still a law that you can't put an ice cream cone in your left pocket. It's illegal. The law comes from like hundreds of years ago, and the idea is people would steal horses because they would put like an ice cream cone in their left pocket, and then the horse would like follow that person because they wanted the ice cream cone, and you'd steal someone's horse. So they're like, you can't put ice cream cones like in your pockets or something.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that makes no sense. You putting ice cream in your pocket, it's going to be
ice cream
not ice cream
cones.
much longer. Oh, like just the cone
The cone.
without
Yeah.
sans ice cream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The waffle cone is in your pocket.
Yes.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, and then it's also like I'm hoping they're also getting to the idea to where like a lot of laws that come out today will like or like bills and stuff, there'll be a bunch of like nuance in there and like a whole bunch of fluff or
Sure.
like just ridiculous stuff,
Yeah.
and then they'll make that law, and instead of just like re-looking at that law to get rid of the fluff when that doesn't make sense anymore, they make another law that negates parts of that law, so it eventually becomes like 100 laws deep, and you have to read all of them to figure out what part of each law makes sense or still applies or whatever, and
I
that
think
gets
the
into the useless officials. Like,
I think the best
go
example
ahead.
of this is the military, because there again there's an abundance of people in the military, and there's an abundance of people in certain pay grades, ranks, right? And so when you get
Mm-hmm.
into a unit where there's an abundance of, let's just use like the senior and CO pay grade, right? What
Yeah.
do? They create jobs for all these people because they have to have responsibilities commensurate with their rank and their level of experience, right? So you
Yep.
see it all the time. They create positions for people that really don't exist, but they'll take apart somebody else's job and say, you can do this. You know what I mean? And then now you've kind of your co consorts in this position when there's no need for you to be that way. And so in
Mm-hmm.
turn, that useless official now generates petty laws, right? Because now if I want to route something keeping with the military theme, I must go through not one, not two, but 3, 4, or 5 other master sergeants or whatever to get what I need, when beforehand all that bureaucracy didn't exist before, right? So we see that with our government. There's all kinds of officials that don't need, like, look at what happened with Twitter recently, right? What Elon Musk said online about, well, when you're not running basically a censorship program, you can fire whatever he said, like 80,000 people, right? So to
Yeah.
me, again, it's like one of these things where when you have a self-licking ice cream cone, you create jobs to lick that ice cream cone. And
Mm-hmm.
that's to me what that says. And see, this is one of those things we're just talking about where like that makes sense. Like I said
Yeah.
in the cold
It does
open,
make sense.
no one likes nonsensical things and no one likes
Yeah.
bureaucrats. If you again, to go back to like the example of the military, you're just trying to go on leave, you need this person's signature. They're not in their office because their job is BS and they don't need to be there anyway, so they're always on
Mm-hmm.
their 3-hour lunch. But you need this signature or somebody's initials to go do this thing. How many times have you just said fuck it, okay, and just gone above them Or, heaven forbid, right? And I'm not saying this happened. You pencil whip somebody's signature or whatever, so you can go on leave, which is constitutional or a congressional right, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, just saying, right? You find ways around them because they don't have a purpose for existing. And so
Hmm.
when you have, to me, this is one of those things where like that makes total and absolute sense to avoid
Yep.
petty laws and useless officials.
Another
Don't
example
create
of use.
bureaucracy.
Yeah, another example of the useless officials and petty laws is from the book that our guest that's coming up wrote. He was talking about how he was trying to help a certain group of people, and he's trying to work with the U.S. government, but because one side of the government was mad at the other side, they like canceled it all. So then the people he's trying to help and the cause he was being like responsible for just all of a sudden got no more funding, lost like a whole bunch of assets, like a whole bunch of things, and then it was like a year later when the two sides made up, it came back. And it was just a petty, useless thing that overall hurt the global situation more than it helped their "I'm mad at you" situation.
Bureaucrats ruining things is what I heard,
Yeah.
which is
Common trend.
yeah, cool. Next one.
Number 6.
Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. So to me, I look at this as harmony would be us solving all our own problems, being, autonomous, not needing outside support. And when you have a conflict, you go to a greater collective to help make a decision to avoid conflict, meaning violent conflict, right? But
Yeah.
again, to me, this implies, one world government,
Yeah,
right?
there has to
Because
be some
a
oversight.
court system, exactly, I was just about to say that. A court system has to have oversight, and that typically means appointed officials, okay, and
Hmm.
not necessarily elected officials. Could you imagine trying to have a global election? You could not have somebody who appeals to both Americans and
Nope.
Indonesians and Nigerians, right? Because we all have different needs based on our geographic location and our lifestyles, right? So
All the
you would,
officials that would be voted in would be Chinese or Indian because they have the most votes.
sure, right? Or consider some of these organizations that exist already who voted in Klaus Schwab, right? This person, he exists, right? And some of these
Yeah.
other, all I'm saying is these would have to be and would more than likely be appointed positions, right? So again, consider our own Supreme Court. Those are appointed positions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're going to have a world court, you're going to there's going to be filters to get there. Should have to be a lawyer, and in turn
Yeah.
be a judge, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then so that requires a very specific and very long process to even get to the point where you're qualified as a lawyer or a judge. And then on top of that, you're now being appointed to a world court where you're making decisions for countries in this guideline. Okay, you're making
Yep.
decisions to resolve external disputes, right? Could you
Hmm.
imagine having a panel of people? Let me just give you an example, right? So we have examples throughout history of panels of people making decisions for large groups. Okay, post World War I, you have the creation of something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, so right. So for anybody who's not familiar with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, this essentially drew the lines of the modern Middle East, okay? And
Yeah. Horrible decision.
horrible decision, okay? These are Europeans making decisions, right? Specifically English and French, Europeans making decisions for people in the Middle East, not taking into account, ancient tribal lines, ancient belief systems, ancient friendships and frenemyships, right? All this stuff. Not just fuck it. Here are the lines. Israel exists. Right? That was way later. But anyway,
That's World War II.
yeah. No, I know. I was making a joke
Yeah.
because again, that was again arbitrary decisions by other people. But
Yep.
what's one of the first things that happened when ISIS took hold in those areas? They started knocking down physical barriers that were erected that marked Sykes-Picot era agreements on what boundaries were, okay?
Yep.
Because it didn't make sense and doesn't make sense logically based on, right, what those people in that area think and their ideologies and their religious belief systems and all these things, right? That really all the Sykes-Picot Agreement did was create a bunch of other problems. Okay, so using that example of, again, a group of people making decisions arbitrarily for others does not go well historically.
Yeah. Number 6, I'm just going to tie 5 into it, because this is protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Because you were talking about how if there's a world court, they need to be like just, they need to be like fair. That's number 5, and it just kind of gets to. So the reason why laws and courts work is because there's a consequence, right? So for there to be a world court that would dictate things for nations means there needs to be nation-sized consequences, or else the nation would do whatever the heck it wants, right? Or else the nation would do whatever the heck it wants. It wouldn't care about your world court.
No.
So, like, for example, today you have the UN, which I guess would be the closest thing today to a world court, where they will, like, come together and be like, North Korea is doing bad things, so we're gonna, like, together sanction North Korea. Yeah. But that's not a real big consequence, because the North Korean regime is still doing whatever the heck they want, when they want. All it's doing is just hurting the North Korean people, to be honest, like the lower tiers of like their economic situation. So like that wouldn't work in this fashion either. Like the consequence would have to be grave, like dire. And the only consequence I could think of is just annihilation. Like, that's the only thing I could think that would be like, oh crap, I need to listen to the World Court. And if that was a thing, then, I don't know, it kind of just sends me in a rabbit hole thinking, like, is the World Court, like, the only thing that has, like, nukes? And if, like, if you're, like,
exactly.
if you're being a punk, they just nuke your country out of existence.
And that's the thing, man. When you talk about stuff like this, there's almost an element of like naivety that exists in all of these things. To sit there and say, let nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Okay, how are you going to maintain and exert that authority? Okay?
Exactly.
How are you going to go about resolving disputes between countries? Because that implies that you have ultimate authority. How are you exerting that authority? How are you getting other people to comply with that authority? What's an easier way? Let me put it this way. Let me paint it in this light. Is it easier to control 500 million people, or is it easier to control billions of people, right? So again, these things start tying into one another. If you're going to let nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court, but you're protecting people and nations with fair laws and just courts, what fair laws and what just courts are you talking about? Are you talking about, if we're resolving, so it says let nations rule internally, that does imply some sort of localized court system. But if there's a global court, right, it also implies that global court probably has some sort of oversight over the decisions a local court is making, because if they're resolving disputes, then inherently there's some authority over that, right? So again, we starts begging all these questions, right? How are you exerting authority? How do countries now exert authority over one another, right? We see it on the news every day. Russia threatens to use nukes if you do certain things, right? The United States does this, or Europe does this, right? We're going to do this, right? And that is, and it is a mode of authority, and it's a mode of control and manipulation. You know what I mean? And again, it's easier to control a smaller population than it is to control a larger population. You see it, if you're a teacher and you've got 50 students, you kind of have probably a lot of mayhem going on, as opposed to if you're a teacher and you've got 10, right?
Yep.
Just saying.
I'm going to say it better myself, and you continue to be a master of segues. We looped 5 into 6. Number 4 is rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. You just said it's easier to rule 500 people. How would you dictate these things? Well, you would probably control their passion, their faith, and their traditions, making them almost kind of like sheep, just following whatever you tell them to do, because they don't know anything else.
Here's two things, right, with this one. First off, one of the first things you do with a people when you're trying to control them is you remove their identity and what makes them separate from you, the perceived ruling class. Okay, the Germans did it with the Jews, right? They gave them all
Mm-hmm.
stars. They put them in camps. They took away their identities, right? The United States did it with Japanese Americans, and
We did.
during World War II, we threw them in not whatever you want to call them, right? Rehoming camps, or whatever they use, what soft language
Internment
they used,
camps.
internment camps, what soft language they used, right,
Yep.
to corral Japanese Americans. But again, what you do when you want to control people, you remove their identity. That's why you shave everybody's head. That's why you give everybody the same uniform when you go to basic training. You are all pieces of shit just the same. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But that's what
You
you
are
do.
all trainees.
Exactly. The other thing here, right? Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason, to me, 100% ties right back down into balanced personal rights with social duties. If you're ruling your passion, your faith, and your tradition, those all have, again, aspects of your identity, right? Your faith, your tradition, your passion. Not everybody is passionate about playing guitar. Not everybody is passionate about playing soccer. We all have different
Mm-hmm.
passions. They are inherent to us as individuals, right? Identity, faith, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, faith.
Yep.
Whether you have faith in a higher being, or you have faith in whatever it is, the goodness of the world, however that looks to you, right? Individualism, okay?
Yep.
Traditions that Hispanic families have are going to be different than
Yep.
traditions that culturally, African families have, or
Yep.
whatever. You know what I mean? The Germans have
Mm-hmm.
different Christmas traditions than, people who celebrate Christmas in Florida, Americans. You
Yep.
know what I mean? And that's not to say you
Yep.
can't be German and live in Florida, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
They're
Correct.
individual characteristics of you, and they're your identity. So if you're balancing your personal rights with social duties, you're casting off what makes you who you are, right? By setting aside your rights for social duties. So when you're tempering, okay, your faith, your tradition, your passions, you're removing or pushing down what makes you who you are. So you can be a
Yep.
better cog in the wheel, or a sheep for the collective, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's how, to me, those two tie together perfectly. And again, talks about, to me, inherently controlling people. Because if you're tempering who
Yeah.
you are and you're doing it for the betterment of society, then you want people to be a collective.
For sure. And the thing with it, so like, out of all types of governments that humanity's ever had, which ones rule passion, faith, and tradition? It's going to be communism, Marxism, dictatorships, ones that, like you said, strip away your
They
individual
don't promote
abilities.
individualism.
Correct. So, like, we can take, like, North Korea, for example. Their faith is extremely tempered with the reason of Kim Jong-un.
Yeah,
Everyone
because
in
they're
North
divine
Korea,
leader.
they literally took the Bible, and anywhere where it was like Jesus, they'd put like Kim Jong Il, pretty much. So like, I don't know if you knew that, but like they pretty much took the Bible and they
Kim
rewrote the
Jong Un.
whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
No, who'd you say put it in there?
Kim Jong Il.
Okay.
They put Kim Jong Il in there because, or no, was it Kim?
Is
I
it Kim
forget.
Jong
It's the
Un?
grant.
Kim Il Sung.
That's the one.
Okay.
Kim Il Sung is the one that they put in there and stuff. So like he's the glory leader and all that type of stuff. And they rewrote it to be that way. So when you're reading their Bible, it's very religious and all that type of stuff. You know, he's a god. Yeah, he's a god, all that type of stuff. So it's insane, but that's what they're doing. They're ruling your passion. That's why you have to like cry when he walks by you. You have to like praise him and like love him like no matter what.
I know that. Like, I mean, his picture's everywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which just seems to be a theme with dictators anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. That's why, like, if your house catches on fire in North Korea and you only have the option to either save your family or save the pictures of the glorious leaders, you better save the pictures of the glorious leaders or else you're going to die. Like, they're going to kill you.
And it still doesn't mean you get an extra ration of rice at the end of the day.
No. You probably still die.
Probably.
Because you don't have medical care after you got a bunch of burns saving the dear leader.
And inhaled a bunch of smoke.
Yeah, but that's what I'm getting at. Like some of these things, like you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then, like when you start combining them, you're like, something's kind of fishy here. It kind of sounds like something that's like really bad, and it kind of sounds like socialism, communism, Marxism, dictatorship. Very, very weird. And that kind of so the third one here. There's no good segues here. We're just going right into it. It says
Send it.
unite humanity with a living new language. Again, this is getting rid of traditions. This is getting rid of individuality. It's getting rid of um, like your past, like all this stuff. Because if you just made all humans have to use one language, there's so much history that is just going to be wiped away. It's just
That's
going to
the
be gone.
that's the overarching theme throughout all of this is the removal of the self, the removal of identity, personal identity for a collective identity.
Correct.
Because having a collective identity means, right, you're all moving towards the same goal, or you all believe the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. You know what I mean? And there is utility in that. Okay, when again to use the example of the military, you show up at basic training, you all are wearing whatever the hell you showed up in. You know, they take you immediately and cut your hair. You get the same uniform. They teach you to march in the same lines. All of these things, it breeds collective, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
controlled because you're part of the collective. And then it starts to, almost breed this thought process of the collective. You know what I mean? And
And in a way, they unite their own language. Like
that's a good point, actually.
when I became a recruiter at recruiter school, they had to like tell us, hey, you've been living like the last like 10 years in the Air Force. When you talk to your coworkers, you talk a certain way because it all makes sense to you. But
Mm,
uh, uh, a recruit thinking of joining has no idea what PCS mean, TDY. Um,
very
uh,
true.
a lace report. They don't know what a salute report is. They
Right.
don't know what rap is. Like, there's all
Right.
these things. They don't know what a Dodi is. They don't know what the UC. There's all these things that we just casually throw around our language, but they
Yeah.
have no idea what it is, and we have to teach them it. They have to be um,
And I'll
uh,
say,
indoctrinated into it.
you take it a step further too, right? Like obviously, the military at large has jargon that we all understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But the Air Force has jargon that somebody who's in the Army may not be like, "What? What do you mean?" Right? And the
yeah.
Army may have, well, not may, 100%. We all, as different branches, have jargon that we use with other, between airman to airman, marine to marine, sailor to sailor, right? That
Yep.
you get. But if you say something, right, to like if I say AFI to a soldier or a Marine, they're gonna be like, what? Right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
specifically stands for Air Force Instruction. Well, Marine
Mm-hmm.
isn't worrying about Air Force instructions. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say out loud, I have no idea what the equivalent to the Marine Corps is. You know what I mean?
I think
And
it's I think it's MCI, Marine Corps Instruction. But
it very
I
well
think
could
it fall.
be. Who knows?
I'm
To me, I mean,
pretty sure they've fallen. I don't think there are any Marine Corps instructions because they fall into the Navy technically. I think they're all Navy instructions.
there. I mean, who knows? There's
But
probably
yeah,
some sort of Marine thing, but you know,
yeah,
uh, but all I'm getting at is you actually that's a very good way to analogize this is that
yeah,
when you're collective you do develop your own language, right? But this is telling specifically unite humanity with a living new language. It will remove a lot of the identity that comes with speaking your own language, because if you've ever met somebody, right, because in the United States the majority of people speak English, right? And there are people who are bilingual. There are people who English is their second language because they immigrated here or they were raised in a home where they spoke Spanish or whatever. You know what I mean? And
yep.
that's one of the great things about the United States is you do have so much cultural diversity. But if you go talk to somebody who grew up in a country like this, use Germany or France, right? I'll say this: the Europeans do know English. That's what they learn at a young age, so they can talk to each other. So the German can talk to somebody who's Italian. What do? They speak English to one another because they all learn English.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the lubricator language. Okay, but
People in
what I'm
Japanese
getting at,
also learn English.
right? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
or Japan, not Japanese.
Yeah, I know what you meant. But you're a very proud French speaker, or you're a very proud German speaker, right?
Yes.
And it's a cultural identity to speak German or to speak French or speak Italian, right? And even further, there are certain, like Spanish, there's a very big difference between speaking like Spanish as somebody who's Puerto Rican, or Spanish as somebody who's Mexican, or Spanish as somebody who was born in Spain, right? There are different
Mm-hmm.
dialects. Even there's different dialects of German, but they're in, to talk about, if you are somebody who's Bavarian in Germany, like, and you go talk to somebody who is a Rhinelander, they may not understand certain things they're saying to one another. And Bavarians very much think, like they're their own country. So language is
Mm-hmm.
very much a self-identifier. So again, we're going through this, the predominant theme is throwing off and casting off personal identity,
Yeah.
for the betterment of the collective.
There's different dialects even just in the United States. Dude
That's
walks up to
true.
me. He's like, "Howdy, y'all." I'm pretty sure he's from
Sure.
Texas or like
Yeah.
somewhere in the South.
You use
When the
specific language, you can kind of tell where
yeah,
somebody's from.
mm-hmm. Like the whole soda pop and Coke debacle.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, shoot, if you
when
ever met
the
somebody from the UK, they're like, oh, I can tell, you're from Essex or you're from wherever based on your accent. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's your background. That's what makes you who
Right.
you are, and that's
Right.
what they want to get rid of. Yeah.
Yeah.
These next, we're gonna add one and two together because they kind of fall in line.
Okay.
So number two is guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. And number one is I think the big one here, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. So they're both about reproduction, population control, make sure everything is relatively good with the earth. Like it
Yeah.
says, number 10, right? Leave room for nature, all that type of stuff. So nature is here again. Um, you kind of touched on the diversity piece where you were kind of saying that it's not just like um, like your skin color or your hair color or like anything like that. It's also just about like ensuring that you have enough diversity in your gene pool to continue your population. We kind of talked about it with the Zack Attack episode, how it's possible that Bigfoot running around, there's only so many of them because they don't have enough diversity in their gene pool and they're dying off. So that's what they're trying to avoid, but then they're also trying to make sure it doesn't get out of control with the 500 million. Um, do you think these two things, because there's two ideas behind these, do you think the 500 million is like, okay, there's a huge catastrophic event, now humanity's reset, keep it under 500 million? Or do you think it's, hey, at some point we're going to knock everything down to 500 million?
So I'll put it this way. So we've been going backwards when we're going through
Yeah.
these, right? So I'm going to flip it for these last two. So if you
Okay.
give somebody the instruction to maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, and then the next instruction you give them is to guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Eugenically, you want fit human beings because fit human beings last, fit human beings make better decisions, fit human beings do better things, okay? Just in general, right?
Think of like
But,
the ancient Spartans, how like when a kid
sure,
was born,
right,
if it was like deformed, they cast it off a cliff.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and during that time, when you had to worry about where your next meal was coming from potentially,
Mm-hmm.
or you're worried about all the other things that ancient man was worried about, unfortunately, having a child that has some sort of deformity or special need is a burden, right? And
Yep.
but again, that's history. But
Yes.
when you're talking about these two things, right? It's saying to guide reproduction wisely. So, if you're guiding reproduction wisely, talking about and looking at it through the lens of diversity, when you have less people, you have to be very careful about how you are reproducing, okay? Because when you have a smaller population, you just inherently have a smaller gene pool, okay? So you have less people
Mm-hmm.
to choose from to ensure that diversity so that when you are reproducing, you're not having children that are too closely related and do have some sort of, deformity or whatever, right? So guide reproduction wisely, keeping in mind that you have a smaller population of people who can reproduce with one another. You do have to guide that reproduction wisely. You have to you're going to have to examine you meet Sally on the street, you like her, you guys decide to start a family together, you need to go get tested to make sure that you guys aren't related too closely to where you can have, when you have kids, that it's a problem, right? So
Yeah,
you
for
have to
sure.
guiding reproduction wisely to ensure to improving fitness and diversity, right? You're focused more on, we have a smaller gene pool. We need to ensure that the diversity of this gene pool remains diverse, right? Not to be redundant, but that requires more attention and more energy put into ensuring that your gene pool remains diverse. And so to me, that's kind of how I view those two. When you look at it, I see them as instructions, because that's what these are technically meant to be. As you say, do this, here's how. That's kind of how I view that.
Yep. Yeah, we did do them backwards. They're written, obviously, from number 1 to number 10.
Yeah, and that's not to say that these. I mean, again, we have been saying that everything is, and it is true that everything is made. The decisions are made to do and say things in a certain way on purpose. So perhaps,
Correct.
you know what I mean. But to me, like flipping it, it makes the most sense when you say that in that regard.
Yep.
And two, right? When we talked about, we're going to tie back into, when we look now, we can kind of shift back into who Mr. Christian was and some of his thought processes were, right? That when you're talking about guiding reproduction, talking about just some of the thought processes that go into these, when you look at them through the lens of eugenics and the ideal human being, it can also have, racial undertones. You know what I mean? Because to the Nazis, the perfect Aryan human being was not somebody who wasn't white or blonde or blue-eyed, right? In this very skewed and racist, total terrible way to look at human beings, right? That's kind of what they were looking at, right? And how they were looking at it. But anyway, so when you look at kind of who R.C. Christian was, there's a lot of speculation when this happened, meaning the monument went up. There was magazine articles written about it, and of course they speculated like who he was. There's been journalists who speculated about who he was. There was a rumor, I guess, at one point in this magazine that he was like a Texas oil baron, just like bored and looking for a way to spend his money, essentially.
There's way too many things connected for him to be a random oil bearer.
Right. And then
or oil baron.
Wyatt Martin, the bank president, basically put that rumor to rest, saying, look, like, I'm not going to say who he was, but I'm telling you, he's not, a Texas oil baron just looking to blow however much money on this arbitrarily without any sort of rhyme or reason other than he's bored, right? So he just basically disabused everybody of that notion that was, put forth. But I want to jump in here on a documentary that was done in 2010 called Dark Clouds Over Alberton. Did you happen to come across that when you were doing research?
I did not, no.
Okay, so the documentary obviously was done on the Georgia Guidestones, and one of the things that happened in this documentary is Mr. Martin kind of gave up the address of the person who potentially is R.C. Christian, okay? And it linked back to an address in Dodge City, Iowa, okay? And a person named Herbert H. Kirsten, okay? And that person, Herbert H. Kirsten, was a doctor, was somebody who, in his obituary, was identified, ironically, as an avid bridge player, former recreational pilot, conservationist, and then somebody who is involved in environmental and world population issues. So right off the bat, what do you see?
I see a lot of things connecting to the 10 things on the Georgia Guidestones. Kind of all relates.
Exactly. So, right. So this obituary that was found in 2005 in the Des Moines Register, again, like I said, was an obituary for somebody named Herbert H. Kirsten, excuse me. It's a little bit strange to have in somebody's obituary that they were an avid bridge player And then to follow it up with that they were focused on world population issues, right? So to me, those are, again, not irrevocable evidence to say that this person is Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Christian, okay? And again, you have the similarity between the name Kirsten and the name Christian, right? Which is, could be coincidental, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? But this obituary has a lot of similarities to this person, So if furthermore, this obituary led to discovering another person named Robert Merriman. Did you find out when you were looking stuff up? Did you find anything on Robert Merriman?
I did not. So a lot of this looking up Christian or the people who like tried to do it, it led me down a path of just Rosicrucians, and then I just went super deep into that and like Freemasonry. So I actually never got to like the actual people. So this is new to me as well.
Got you. So I'm just kind of read to you some of the notes that I took, right? So Robert Merriman was the treasurer for a large publishing company that purchased the Fort Dodge, Iowa Messenger, which is a newspaper, okay? And he served as that paper's general manager until the late 70s, which ironically is when the Georgia Guidestones were commissioned in 1979, the late 70s, right?
Yep.
And online, you can find a lot of people speculating or making claims that Mr. Merriman and Mr. Kirsten were friends. They're both from Iowa, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in Iowa that don't know each other. But again, you can't find any sort of actual like on paper links like saying like, Robert Merriman and Herbert Christian did this together, and are friends or whatever. But something else that sort of throws weight into the evidence that Mr. Kirsten is indeed somebody who potentially could be R.C. Christian. In the 1990s, a columnist that wrote for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, his name is James Driscoll, received a letter in the mail that came from somebody who identified themselves as an Iowa physician named Herbert H. Kirsten. Okay, and this ties into some of the eugenic, some of the overtones of racism that can exist when you start looking at what eugenics can mean. That the letter expressed support for David Duke. You ever heard of David Duke?
No.
Okay, so
You're
David
teaching me
Duke,
a lot of stuff today, Gresham.
So David Duke is somebody who is openly racist. He is somebody that he was a leader. I think they called them Grand Dragons, right? In the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, I know David Duke is now. Yes,
right. I know that several years back he kind of got brought into the mainstream media again because of a certain president. But anyway, so essentially he was expressing that a lot of good Americans had views that were in line with David Duke, and that it was unfortunate that the put forth politicians that are okay to support don't share some of those same ideals, right? So, and the rest of the letter essentially supported limiting immigration into the United States, stating that the United States should only help other countries help themselves, but should not carry the burden of the world, which, I mean, that sentence specifically I do agree with. The United States should not carry the burden of the world. But to me, when you look at all of that and these statements that this letter was making from somebody whose name is Herbert H. Kirsten, the obituary, like there's this evidence that, I guess you could call it evidence, that this it lends credence to him actually being R.C. Christian, right? But here's something else to me that is more than just coincidental when you look at, you're tying these two people together, Robert Merriman and Herbert Kirsten, okay? There was a publication put out by a small publisher in Iowa called Common Sense Renewed. So who wrote Common Sense, the original?
drawing a blank. Tell us all.
Founding Father.
Okay, yes. Founding Father.
Thomas Paine.
Yep.
We've already mentioned him before, right? So Thomas Paine, for people who don't know, was very openly against religion, very openly against organized religion, okay? Was very much a fan of free speech, and not just in like the, oh, America, free speech, like, sort of way, that people tend to, for some reason, throw like negative connotation towards, which is stupid. But
Hmm.
wrote specifically about how free speech allows for the pursuit of truth, and that when you're limiting other people's speech, you're actually limiting their identity, which we've also had conversations about in this podcast episode, right?
For sure.
So the publication Common Sense Renewed was put out by the publisher. Person that worked for was Robert Merriman. So again, here's a tie to these ideals of these Rosicrucian ideals, the link between Robert Merriman and potentially Herbert H. Kirsten, having put a publication out together called Common Sense Renewed. And if you look on the Georgia Guidestones, what's one of the things that it talks about, right? Is it talks about ushering in an enduring age of reason, right? And again, Age of Reason is another pamphlet or book, right, that Thomas Paine wrote. And that book was about essentially an overt attack on organized religion in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that publication, right, while I said speculated was put out and like commissioned by Kirsten, and then the publisher had ties to Robert Merriman, the name that went on that publication, Common Sense Renewed, was Robert Christian.
Wow.
So you see that name again being used, right, in another way. In a publication that was put out, Common Sense Renewed, from a publisher that had links to Robert Merriman, who was a publisher who owned a publishing company, who owned a newspaper in Iowa, right? And then you have Herbert H. Kirsten, who potentially was this person that showed up there in Georgia in 1979 under the pseudonym Robert Christian, right? So could have added the C middle initial, right? Because I have not seen anything online about what C stands for, right? So Robert C. Christian, R.C. Christian, specifically, have you seen anything about what C stands for?
No, the only connection is that RC is just the
Rose Cross,
Rose Rosicrucian symbol.
right?
So maybe it just wanted to be RC Christian to designate it.
Yeah, for sure. But to me, like this is all circumstantial evidence, but very coincidental, and to me, bordering on not coincidental. That the fact that that's put out by Robert Christian just throws a lot of weight. And the speculation is that Merriman and Kirsten teamed up to write that book and build the Guidestones together, essentially. So
That's insane. So many things are just tied together. Got the Rosicrucians in the 1600s, 500 million population in the 1600s. You got all these three people communicating with each other, talking about eugenics. All happen to be Iowa. Wow. There's too many things connected for it to not be a coincidence.
Yeah, and something that Thomas Paine also wrote about, and going back to some of these ancient undertones that Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry have, is he said that Freemasonry is the remains of the religion of the Druids, and the religion of the Druids is the same as the ancient Egyptians, right? And he goes on to talk about how Egyptian priests were scientists, that they taught science, all these different things, hinting at the mysticism of the ancient Egyptians, of the Druids. When you're combining mysticism and religion, you are 100% tying in a lot of the thought processes and beliefs of groups like the Rosicrucians. And Thomas Paine, rumored to be a part of the Rosicrucians. Other people that you may recognize their names from, that have links to the Rosicrucians and Freemasons are Benjamin Franklin, Sir Francis Bacon, some of these people that are well known throughout history, and specifically for their, I guess you could say, ideological and philosophical thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So while there is no definitive proof on who R.C. Christian was, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence, from other places that kind of points a direction at that. In summarizing, him showing up using the name Robert Christian, the letter that this guy, from the Florida newspaper got, supporting some of these ideals that you can look through the same lens that you can look at the Guidestones from. This person who owned this publishing company that put out this publication, and then potentially knew Herbert H. Kirsten. The name that the publication came out of, Robert Christian. There's just all this circumstantial evidence that to me is, bordering on this can't be just coincidence. And again, I can't prove this, and what I'm saying is just 100%, my thoughts and opinions on what, I've heard, what I've listened to, what I've seen, all these things about this. But, when you start to consider the source, and what I mean the source, I mean like this, whomever this man was that commissioned this put up, and you start looking at all of the meaning that goes behind, this name and what's on these Guidestones, and some of the other overarching themes, and this concept of one world government. Think of a lot of the symbols and the symbolisms that we have in our country specifically, that tie into New World Order, right? What is on the dollar bill?
It's got a whole bunch of like Freemason type stuff and like
It
the
does.
pyramid eye, and it's a lot of symbolism.
Right. So yeah, that eye, the all-seeing eye, right? There is. I wrote the name down for what the eye of providence is. What that eye is called, right? So you have the words Novus Ordo Seclorum, which mean in Latin New World Order, right? You have the phrase E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one, right? And which again, talking about a collective in unity as one, right? So there's a lot of things that have assigned meaning that have some duplicity, and elasticity to kind of look at them from different angles. You know what I mean? And there's heavy, the Masonic square and compass. You can find that on a lot of different things in our country. If you've ever looked at a Masonic temple, and again, I'm not a Mason, but I've had people who are Masons tell me that like there's symbolism on these buildings that you're not going to recognize unless you are a Mason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there are things on, and dude, this is going to sound weird and people may not believe me, but I swear to God, driving home from work today, I was behind somebody on the highway and they had the Masonic compass and square, like a decal on their car, like the Freemason thing. And I was like, dude, that's so strange. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I'm about to talk about this later.
Right. You know what I mean? These little strange synchronicities that you run into, am I looking for it subconsciously because I've spent the past, week researching all this stuff.
Yeah.
Would I have noticed it if I hadn't? I don't know. You know what I mean? These are these questions you ask yourself when you're doing shit like this, but
it is interesting how the brain can like jump to those things. You see things more often.
Yeah.
Reading the book that you and I are both reading from the author, and he did talk about like the Cooper's colors and stuff like that, like your different levels.
Yeah.
When I read that part, and then I was like driving later, I was like, wait a minute, am I being followed? This just went down this whole thing. I was like, there's no reason for me to be followed. This doesn't make any sense. But it's interesting how, because you just start subconsciously thinking of the things that you're invested in and investigating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it doesn't take a lot to see a lot of the the Masonic symbolism that is in the United States' culture. And then there are and we don't have to go down this rabbit hole super deep, but like there's a lot of secret society stuff that goes into leaders in our country. You look at organizations like the Skull and Bones, and you look at people, how many people who were presidents that were part of this organization. You know what I mean? And President, George H.W. Bush was a member of the Skull and Bones, and there's a lot of other very, very prominent people that were members of the Skull and Bones or other secret organizations, right? Like participating in the events, Bohemian Grove, a lot of the really creepy shit that you can find at like Denver Airport. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You look at
and the Freemason symbol is in there.
It is. If when you look at, again, that commissioning stone at the airport, what's it made out of? It's made out of granite. right? And it says, the New World Airport Commission, when there is no such thing as a New World Airport Commission, right?
Yep.
And then you have all this creepy stuff. Like I just went and visited family in Colorado and flew into Denver Airport, and it's crazy how long once you like turn into the property, it still takes you like 30 minutes to get to the actual terminal. It's this massive amount of land, and where I live next to some big cities in California, and it's not that hard. It takes just a matter of a few minutes to get to these terminals, even if you're going to like San Francisco airport or LA airport, right? It doesn't take you that long. And again, like there's more wide open land in Colorado than there is in California and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But, like, which, is logical. But there it is, Lucifer, right? That crazy ass big horse, that.
Yeah. With the glowing red eye.
Glowing red eyes. Like, oh, that's just the Denver Bronco. You know what I mean? Like, but dude, why? First off, if it was a representation of the Denver Bronco and you're trying to, associate it to the football team, why does it need to be creepy? Why does it need to look like a horse out of the Book of Revelation and so you could see his ribs? The guy who designed and built it died before it could get put up. The horse, something came off the horse and cut
killed
his
him.
leg. Yeah. So like all these, again, like that's just creepy in and of itself. That's pretty terrifying when you consider like this statue killed somebody and there it is. It's creepy. It's not like this. It's not like a reproduction of the Venus de Milo, you know what I mean? And it just fell over and landed on somebody, which would be terrible. But it's a creepy picture of a horse, and horses have an Armageddon revelation, tie, you know what I mean? Like, behold a pale horse, all these different things that you can assign, and again, right, you can assign your own thought processes and the meaning you assign to these things is dependent upon you, right? And we can just say, maybe that was the intention all along, that this is the Denver Bronco, right? Or maybe it is supposed to be some sort of, negative, dark connotation to it, and then
you can look at everything individually and like, oh, it's a Denver Bronco thing, or it's made out of granite, so it looks pretty and it lasts, and oh yeah, of course, like the Freemasons would be interested in it because they build things. Like, but if you look at stuff together, that's when it starts to like come like all full circle, kind of like what we just did with RC Christian and how it all connects with all that type of stuff. This is kind of the same thing here, like. You said you've been in the Denver airport. I've been in it before too, and I was traveling through for like a TDY or something. Yeah. And I remember when I was walking, again, like you said, super long hallways and all this type of stuff. And I was like walking, and I walked past a painting, and the painting is like a soldier with like a gas mask, and he's like shooting children, and there's like a fire in the background. Like it's a very weird painting to be in a hallway of an international airport.
It is. Like who wants to go to know you're going to be flying in a metal tube across the country or around the world and you see some really scary painting that's just going to put you in this like shitty mindset. You have this soldier in a gas mask. There's like gas going around. He's got his big ass sword. There's dead kids on the ground in this painting. And then it's like it's like a mural in different pieces around. It's not like one big continuous mural. Like there's another scene, right, where like all these kids are like gathered around, this flower thing, and honestly, the first time I saw that painting, it made me think of like a song I heard in church one time, like talking about like kids and like Jesus and stuff like that, and like so like it's not unheard of for like ideology or like religion to use like children and the innocence of children to like project a narrative, you know what I mean? So that's fairly common. But even though that painting is like that one specifically of all the kids like gathered around this like really beautiful colorful flower or whatever, it looks, I guess, on the surface like you could say like, oh, that's a positive looking painting, but like it's unsettling to look at too, you know what I mean? And not even considering the other paintings that are a part of this one piece of art, right? Even though it's dispersed around different parts of the airport, it's just like it does that those paintings tell a story. You know what I mean? It tells the story of like the devastation and then the rebuilding and then the coming together, you know what I mean? And there's the destruction. The old world has passed away and the new world has come out, you know what I mean?
And you
And
now come together in a coalition, and there's no more
right,
individuality, and
right.
you're going to do things for the better man. And
Exactly, man. And to me, like, it ties into that whole thing again. You can tie it into the Rosicrucian concept of the
mm-hmm.
13,000 year reset, right?
Yeah. So is the Rosicrucians believe, or one of their main things is that there's a 13,000 year like reset, where every 13,000 years something happens, either man-made or catastrophic, and it just resets like humanity and all this type of stuff. And that's what they're getting ready for, was to have something for the next section of humanity that would sprout after the 13,000 reset. Would have something to go off of and to build off of and things like that. And so it's kind of interesting. We did a poll, obviously, of like what you guys wanted to hear about stuff, and it came out to ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
And this actually kind of ties into the 13,000 year reset. So it'd be kind of like there was maybe an ancient civilization, 26,000 years ago, and then they existed, and then there was a reset, and there was another one 13,000 years ago, and then it was reset there too. So we're definitely going to do a lot of research into that and go more in depth, but it's just interesting how a lot of these things, they fit together, and a lot of the concepts we're going to go over kind of just connect and fit together, and I'm excited for future episodes because of it.
Absolutely, me too. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I may put my foot in my mouth here for a second, so call me out or somebody correct me. But we talk about that poll and how we wanted to talk about the potential of an ancient civilization that was as advanced or more advanced or whatever as we are, having wiped off the face of the earth, and now this rebuild, right? One of the people who is a great mouthpiece and proponent of that concept is Graham Hancock. And you can sit here, and not you, but proverbially, you can sit here and try to tell me all this crap about, Graham Hancock, and how he's a kook or whatever. And I'm not saying, everything the man says is right, but he asks some interesting questions. And, and I really appreciate his work because he looks at things from a different way, right? One of the things that he talks about all the time with Randall Carlson, who is a geologist, because Graham Hancock is not an archaeologist, he's not an anthropologist, he's a journalist, right? So, and he does take some liberties with some of the things he says and speculates on some archaeological evidence of other people. But the thing they talk about it being the Younger Dryas event, okay, I want to say it was like 11,700 years ago or thereabouts, which is close enough. I mean, I get it. Like that's there's a 1,300 year difference between, 1,300 year difference between 11,700 and 13,000 years ago. But those are very close together, right? On the grand scale of the life of the earth. You know what I mean? Because it's not saying like every 13,000 years exactly this is going to happen thereabouts, right? It's going to happen. So this, and once again, this is just me, and I'm tying again a bunch of shit together, but the Younger Dryas event is what he says and postulates that, it's this cataclysmic event where all of these meteorites crashed into the North American ice shelf and caused this massive melting of all of this glacial water, right? And it caused this flood, right? Which, every culture,
every civilization has a flood myth.
Own flood myth and all this stuff, and right. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence because there's no way. And Randall Carlson is where like a lot of this gets tied in together scientifically. And there are other geologists who contest with what he says, and they go back and forth, and that's totally cool because that's the way it's supposed to be. That's how science exists, right? But that's again like what you're talking about. It's interesting. I just put it that way. It's interesting to think about and try to make those comparisons about, something like the Younger Dryas impact event and then what the Rosicrucians say about 13,000 year cycles for resetting of humanity, right? Because those are, again, loosely can be looked at together. You know what I mean? So just something interesting to kind of wrap this conversation up and tie it into other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a good time to kind of tie it all up. We could go way more. Oh, yes. But before we get to that, we can go way more into these Georgia Guidestones. We didn't get into like the destruction of them, why they were blown up, all this type of stuff.
That's
So we're
true.
definitely going to have to hit this with a part 2. We may get some better insight into that investigation and stuff,
Yeah, there's
which would
the
be kind of cool.
potential of having somebody on who was, a part of that investigation that took
Yeah.
place when they were blown up, because they did not ever arrest anybody, and you can go find the video of that blowing up.
Yep.
But so I'll just say this: there's a potential for a part 2 to this episode. And that would be amazing if we could have him on. Hopefully that happens. So get your hopes
Yes.
up, Fire fans. My hopes are up. But if that happens, we'll definitely let you know if we get a confirmation that he'll come on the episode with us. That would be amazing. But let's talk about our sponsor here, Red Clover Coffee. As you guys know, we are proud to have them as our sponsor. Again, I have here their peanut Burt. Right, because the A10 Burt, right, and then this one is really good. I've said it before. Blueberry Invasion is awesome. Rocking the hat. It's a dope hat. I got some more coffee coming here pretty soon, and I cannot recommend them enough, you guys, genuinely. And don't be a pansy, dude. Buy yourself a coffee grinder and get whole bean and make it. It tastes so much better when
it's fresh.
grinding your own coffee beans. Absolutely. But their coffee's delicious. They are go check them out, honestly. Go to redclovercoffee.com or go check out their Instagram page. You can find them through our Instagram page if you've already followed us but haven't followed them. If you go to our story highlights, there's one that says coffee code. Click it. You can go right to their profile page. They donate to charity. They are very, very, very kind company. Veteran owned. Cannot recommend them enough. There's some very cool stuff that you can check out. You can get 10% off with our code. Came with FIRE at checkout. Highly recommend doing that because who wants to pay full price? But my favorite for sure is this peanut butter, right? Peanut butter bandit or blueberry invasion. So Red Clover Coffee, thank you to you guys for sponsoring our podcast, and go check them out. Get some coffee at a 10% discount price.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to say thanks to everyone listening. Make sure you please like, comment, subscribe, all those generic things we got to kick out there. It's free for you to do and super quick and easy for you to do, but it really helps us out a lot. So if you could please share, like, comment, subscribe. If you're looking to get some coffee, if you're looking to get some coffee, please use the code. That also helps us out a lot. It bolsters our publicity. So it's pretty nice.
Sure. Great conversation, brother. Like you said, please comment, subscribe, head over to our Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and good night, Fire fans. Thank you for listening.